So, lots of people are wondering what's going to happen now that the election is over? What's going to happen after the election? I've been asking myself the same question. So, I thought I'd share 5 takeaways, 5 things that I'm thinking about, in terms of what's going to happen next. So, the first one is give credit where credit is due. This election was won for Biden in no small part due to heroic organizing efforts by Black communities, Black women in particular, folks like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, folks who turned out their communities despite all of the barriers that have been put into place, despite the racism and the police violence and the incarceration and the poverty, the environmental injustice, and particularly the gerrymandering, the redistricting, closing poll stations, the voter suppression, voter ID laws, signature requirements, all these things we know are designed to prevent these communities from being able to exercise their right to vote. So in spite of this, in spite of all of these barriers, these folks turned out to vote, delivered, Biden victories in key areas, and credit where credit is due. I think anybody who's invested in a stable democracy in the United States, anybody who's invested in the idea of American leadership being a positive force in the world, owes these communities a debt of gratitude because they put in the work and they delivered the results. And for folks who are in the U.S. and are able to do something about this, that debt of gratitude needs to be paid with resources by taking down these barriers, by empowering these communities, by addressing these grievances and wrongs, historical wrongs and contemporary wrongs that continue today. So give credit where credit is due. Now, there's 2 other pieces to that. One is, we've got to look at who voted for Trump and sort of give some sort of credit to them. I don't know if it's credit, but we need to talk seriously about the fact that so many people still turned out for Trump after 4 years of seeing or not seeing how destructive he is, how poisonous and corrupt he is, how racist he is and can be, and how much he's empowered racist communities and extremists, white nationalists and so on, as well as the wacky conspiracy theorist folks. So despite 4 years of all of this, of Trump being Trump, a lot of people still voted for him for a lot of reasons. Part of it, I think the conversation has to be around this alternative reality news environment that a lot of these folks are unfortunately living in and being radicalized in, such that they're really living in a different world. But we also can't ignore the fact that the largest voting blocs for Trump seem to have been white men and white women. And that's not a coincidence. Racism is at the heart of this electoral outcome, at the heart of Trump's performance, and at the heart of Trump's appeal. And that problem doesn't go away, in January when Joe Biden takes office. So that needs to be addressed. And I think, that looks probably like a whole lot of things, but it starts with naming the problem and continuing to name the problem and recognizing it for what it is. The other piece about giving credit where credit is due, I think some folks have been saying something to the effect that, the fact that it was a relatively smooth election, relatively peaceful. Biden won, and despite all of these transparent efforts by Trump and his allies to subvert American democracy, to undertake an authoritarian takeover of the country, despite all of those efforts, Biden won, and so the system works. No, bad take. That doesn't tell the whole story, right? We cannot afford to be complacent. This was an incredibly dangerous election, certainly the most dangerous election that I've ever been alive for, in North America at least. And we cannot afford to be complacent about what Trump and his team tried to do, about the tacit support, the tacit approval of much of the Republican Party. Too many are being too quiet, and too few have spoken up. And so, the fact that things have sort of gone okay so far, that things have worked out, that's not just because the system has worked. That's people putting in the work. The poll workers, the election security experts, the journalists, and the people who pay for journalism. Subscribe to a local newspaper if you can. And all the folks who turned out to vote. So all of that effort, but also I think, we got lucky. There's little question that many in the Republican Party would have been quite happy to quite aggressively go along with the charade of absurd lawsuits and frivolous action and just outright lying coming from the Trump camp. But the fact that so many people turned out to vote has made that a lot harder for them to do. So again, credit where credit is due. I think looks like those three pieces. The second sort of takeaway, what's going to happen next after the election, I think flows from what I was just saying, and that is that Trump and Trumpism are not going away. Unfortunately, it's not like we're going to hit a magic button, in January when Joe Biden takes office and everything just goes back beautifully to some sort of easy new life. Unfortunately, all of these folks who voted for Trump, all of these folks who believe that he won in a landslide, are not going away. They're still out there. They're still holding these beliefs. These ideas are still circulating. Now, let me be a little bit more specific about why I think Trump and Trumpism are not going away. First, Trump is a malignant narcissist. We've seen this. Anybody who's really followed his career, I think, has said this for a long time. This is a guy who appears to be struggling with numerous personality disorders to the great detriment of anybody under his sway, anybody in his orbit, and that's been much of the world while he's been president. But he is utterly shameless, and we've seen that there's no bottom to his narcissism, to his need for attention, to his need to tell self-serving lies that make him out to be a very stable genius, the least racist guy in the room, and all of this nonsense. He needs to tell himself these things because he's a total raging narcissist, and he appears to believe them. I mean, that's the thing too. He's sort of high on his own supply here. So this narcissism is going to continue to drive much of his behavior. He appears to believe, I think, or plausibly believes that he won in a landslide, because the notion of loss, of loss, is just too sort of humiliating to bear. It's too incongruous with his narcissistic self-image and personal mythology. So I think we're going to continue hearing from Trump for a very long time that he won this election. I don't think he's going to concede, or if he concedes, it's going to be grudgingly with a whole bunch of sort of asterisks, so, essentially claiming that he won the election in the same way that he kept complaining about the Emmys for years and years and years and years, in the same way that he kept spreading crazy conspiracy theories about Obama and about others. This is not a guy who knows how to let go of a lie, of a bad idea, particularly, unless it's to replace it with another one. So his narcissism is going to keep him in the public eye. He's also in a lot of trouble. So Trump has sort of been playing this lifelong con game, the way I read it, sort of managing to magically fail upwards by, ever expanding the number of rubes willing to pay for his failures, and by conducting all sorts of fraudulent behavior, as we've seen from the limited sort of public analysis of his tax returns. And so now the presidency was sort of the final stage in his great con to get more power and influence and wealth for his family so that they could enrich themselves. And now he's lost. Now he doesn't have that tap, that faucet, that access anymore, that platform. And so he's in trouble. He's got reportedly, Trump and his businesses, about $900 million in loans coming due. From my reading, about half of those personally guaranteed by he or his family. So, somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 or $500 million reportedly personally due in the next 4 years. Much of that to parties unknown. We don't know who holds those loans. That would be a huge national security problem if he were still going to be in office for another 4 years. And frankly, it has been a huge national security problem for the last 4 years. But his financial troubles are going to require him to keep this grift going, to keep looking for ways to extract money from people who unfortunately have bought into his story, have bought into his lies, and to whom he will continue to turn for support. And this is already happening. If you're on the unlucky, receiving end of one of his campaign emails, where he's been fundraising for all of these spurious legal challenges, apparently, if you read the fine print, much of that money is actually going to repay campaign debts. So expect this type of behavior to continue as the financial squeeze increases on Trump, and he keeps, doing the only thing he knows how to do, which is lie and scam and cheat and steal. and spread lies and conspiracy theories and just be a fraudulent manipulator. And unfortunately, there's still going to be folks who fall for that behavior. This is the guy who brought us Liberty University and Trump steaks, and we shouldn't expect anything less. His track record is pretty clear. Relatedly, the GOP, the Republican Party, is unfortunately in Trump's thrall. They've sort of spent 4 years renegotiating their Faustian bargain for power, constantly in favorable terms for his sort of devilish, democracy destroying behavior. And there's no real reason to think that they're going to stop necessarily now or find the light or suddenly fundamentally change. We've seen that the Republicans are really willing to stoop pretty much as low as Trump is willing to take them. And further, they're now vulnerable because they need his base. Trump showed that there was a viable path to victory by sowing just the worst kind of division, by inflaming white nationalist grievance and particularly rural white grievance, and by stoking the sort of authoritarian sentiments of a large subset of the population, and by indulging in conspiracy theories and just cultivating this following that lives in an alternative reality. And so how can anybody be a moderate Republican now in that party when they're vulnerable to challenges, to primary challenges from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, the new Q Congresswoman from Georgia, who's full pilled to the gills, as they say, full on QAnon, and is now bringing those beliefs openly to Congress. So it's tough to be a moderate Republican now, I think, when Trump and his family are effectively gatekeepers to this very loyal, very fanatical following of people who live in an alternative factual reality in which Trump won in a landslide that was stolen from him by a nefarious cabal of child-eating Democrats or whatever. Kind of tough to be a moderate Republican when Trump can aim, the sights of these people, literally and figuratively, on any Republicans who don't want to sort of play ball. And the other way to think about this is, if you're a Republican in office, you want these people's votes. They're motivated, they're fervent, they're fanatical, they feel like they have a righteous cause. And if you can sort of wink and smile and nod and indulge them, they're going to turn out for you. So Trumpism, with or without Trump, is not going away. This sort of environment of fanatical, conspiracy-minded people will continue to be part of the political discourse and the political landscape. We've also got sort of a new generation of politicians. Politicians and staff and activists whose views of what politics is and should be have been shaped by Trump. So people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people like Madison Cawthorn from North Carolina, I believe, who appears ready to bring, I don't know if it's a new level, but certainly a degree of sort of contemptuous trolling to Congress. And that's to say nothing of other folks on the extreme right, whether, religious extremists or white nationalists who have been really emboldened for Trump and whose experience has been that there's been a space opened for them in political life, in political discourse. And they have experienced that they were close to their perverse victory. So those folks aren't going away either. Trump has really sort of opened a terrible box, and we're going to have a really hard time sort of stuffing all of those contents back down. So no moderate Republicans, new generation of politicians sort of cut in Trump's mold. I think one of the real dangers is the risk of a competent Trumpist. Zeynep Tufekci, I'm sure I'm probably not pronouncing her name right, but I'm a huge fan in the unlikely event that she's watching, and she's written about this, others have written about this, but there's a real danger that we get somebody who sees, okay, look, Here's this huge voting constituency. Trump has shown that an authoritarian can run and win in America, that there's an appetite for authoritarian governance. And so somebody who, maybe with a one or two fewer personality disorders, who gets out of their own way a little bit more, somebody, as people have said, more interested in governing than golf, someone with fewer gaffes, a better sense of discipline and organization. A disciplined Donald would be very dangerous for America and for the world, because this is somebody, again, look how many people voted for Trump, despite all of the self-imposed catastrophes that he created within his own administration, the constant revolving doors of people in and out, all the people he fired, all the people who got arrested, his terrible judgment in staffing people, his terrible judgment generally, the lies, the, contradictions, the record. People still voted for him. Imagine if he had been more competent. And this is the risk. And I guarantee you that people are making this calculation on the extreme right now, thinking, hey, I can do this, or, oh, this guy should really go. He'd be great. He should run. Trump and Trumpism, long story short, not going away. And we've got to watch out for the authoritarians to come. Now, the next sort of takeaway, what's going to happen next after the election, right? We're circling back. So we've gone through give credit where credit is due. Trump and Trumpism are not going away. The third takeaway in terms of what's going to happen now next after the election, now that the election is over, I think the disinformation crisis is just getting started. Again, we're not going to hit January and magically this problem is going to go away. I think we're just getting started. So there's a few reasons for this. I mean, Trump himself has been terrible for disinformation. The guy has been sort of President Tinfoil. He's, as I said earlier, he spent years spreading this racist conspiracy theory about Obama's place of birth, completely unfounded, didn't stop him from harping on about it for years and years. This is the guy who claimed that global warming was invented by the Chinese, I think, to destroy the U.S. economy. It's totally unhinged, but people like Trump have brought it into the mainstream. They've brought it into the presidency, into Congress, into the Senate, and into politics generally, and into sort of much of mainstream discourse. And maybe you're watching this and somebody who's been radicalized online in this terrible disinformation ecosystem, somebody who's been pulled into the wild massive QAnon sales funnel, the sort of omni-conspiracy that seems to catch people in all sorts of places and just bring them so quickly and so devastatingly down the rabbit hole until they're living in an alternate reality. This problem isn't going away. So it predates Trump. We've had conspiracy theories. We've had a corrosive information environment, particularly on the right, for many years. Fox News has been, a critical piece of this and continues to be a massive problem. Obviously, social media has amplified things in some ways. We've seen recommendation algorithms be problematic even here on YouTube. We've seen all sorts of radicalization happening online. Trump, again, President Tinfoil, he has amplified, a lot of fringe voices, folks like Alex Jones. He's created more space for them closer to the mainstream. Nobody should ever give Alex Jones a microphone. The guy's claims are just totally bananas. They've always been bananas. He's a total grifter. He does not deserve to be listened to anybody. And the fact that he's been, given platforms is just maddening and terrifying. Similarly, QAnon has obviously come to life the last few years. These ideas are just sort of becoming louder, more mainstream in the Republican Party. The Republican Party is just unfortunately becoming a party where there's a lot of room, a lot of home for these ideas. And so I don't think it's going away, again, because they're vulnerable to the voters that they believe in this stuff, even if the politicians themselves don't. But as we're seeing with folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, a lot of the time they do. And this has a long lineage too. I mean, we can't talk about disinformation and conspiracy theories in the Republican Party without talking about global warming. And they've been on this crazy global warming isn't happening train for decades now. And it's just an utter embarrassment. So again, I don't think the disinformation crisis is going away. If anything, it's going to get worse. And we need to continue to have serious conversations about how to protect our friends and family, about what regulatory interventions are required for social media platforms, and so on. So, what's next? Give credit where credit is due. Trump and Trumpism aren't going away. Disinformation isn't going away. What next is the next thing for, what's going to happen next after the election? Well, we've got to talk about the pandemic. Unfortunately, so there's been great news the last week or two. Seems like every day there's some new promising vaccine news, and this is exciting, and we should be excited about this. We should feel a sense of relief. Anything that gives us light at the end of the tunnel is welcome and should be celebrated. And, frankly, we've got to celebrate every victory we can. Keep those endorphins going, my friends. But the reality is as well that, it's going to be some time before vaccines are manufactured and distributed widely enough that we can think about getting back to anything resembling normal. It could be the end of 2021. We could be a year deeper into this before we start thinking about saying things like normal again. I hope that's not true. I hope we get miraculous speed on these things, and certainly there have been heroic efforts made and just miraculous speed on the vaccine development so far, and these results seem to be promising, but we can't sort of delude ourselves into thinking that things are just going to be back, hunky-dory in January or February or March. It's going to take some time, not just within a given country, but from country to country. Different places are going to be getting access to the vaccine at different times. And the disinformation crisis affects us here as well. I was reading that only approximately 58%, based on the most recent poll I saw, 58% of Americans currently saying that they would get a COVID vaccine. That's a low number. That's not good. And again, years of disinformation, years of online radicalization, eroding people's trust in the safety of vaccines. Unfortunately, that's going to make the rollout of any vaccine much harder. Now, these numbers seem to be fluid. Apparently, it was 50% back in September. So if it's moved up by 8 points, in a couple of months, that seems promising. But are we going to get to 100% compliance? I don't know. I doubt it. So inevitably, this sort of puts a wrinkle in where we go. And in the meantime, if you've been to the New York Times, recently and looked at the numbers, the daily case counts are through the roof. They're higher than they've ever been in the U.S. The 7-day rolling average is higher than it's ever been. Death counts are rising again, and hospitals are sounding the alarm. Some of the most best prepared hospitals in the country, in the United States, are preparing to be totally overwhelmed. This is just totally tragic and infuriating because it was so preventable. I remember my mind reeling back in March, reading forecasts that said, as many as 200,000 Americans might die should the pandemic be allowed to spread and widely. And my mind sort of reeling, trying to wrap my head around the horror of that number. And we've passed that threshold. And we may double it again before this thing is over. It didn't have to be this way, and it doesn't have to be that way. But the government has so badly bungled this pandemic and the response to this pandemic that hundreds of thousands of people have died unnecessarily, and it's just truly shocking. And if you have been touched by that tragedy, I'm so sorry, truly. So we're not out of the woods with COVID. The numbers are going up. And not only that, the limited supports that have been put in place for many folks in the United States are going down. So there are supports, from unemployment insurance to eviction relief, to I believe student debt relief and small business aid, limited reporting support regimes that have been put into place, probably insufficient to begin with, not reaching enough people, not of high enough magnitude. But as it is, some of these things are coming to an end at the end of the year, or certainly before Joe Biden takes office. And so a whole lot of people, as we head into winter, as we head into the holiday season, are at risk of losing the limited supports that they have had. We know that already tens of millions of Americans are struggling with food, going to food banks, struggling to put food on the table, struggling obviously to make ends meet. And that problem seems poised to get worse, which is, again, tragic, infuriating, and preventable. So, and bodes poorly for the economy and for the state of the recovery. I've just been astounded by the relative euphoria of the stock market over these months, and I think there's a great disconnect between what's been happening there a lot of days and what's going on in the real economy, and certainly things seem poised to get a lot worse potentially before they get better, particularly given that there's still a couple months before Joe Biden takes office and the Democrats can start undoing some of this damage. Finally, so we've gone through 4 things so far. Give credit where credit is due. Trump and Trumpism aren't going away. The disinfo crisis is just getting started. We're not out of the COVID woods. Wear a mask. Limit your outings as much as you can, if you can. What else is going to happen now that the election is over? What else should we be thinking about? Well, COVID is not the only crisis we're facing. This authoritarian assault on democracy is not the only crisis we're facing. We've also got to think about things like climate change. Climate change is not going away. These other big, global problems, these complex long-run challenges that we're facing are not just going to stand up in a nice little line and wait for us to deal with them one by one. Climate change is here, it's happening, and we've still got to deal with it even when we're dealing with these other emergencies. It's been a big year for climate change. I mean, California swept with absolutely cataclysmic, record-setting fires, the Arctic on fire, a plague of locusts swarming through parts of the Middle East and Eastern Africa. We're seeing more and more of these intense climate-related disasters. We're seeing the signal of climate change in more and more disasters and extreme weather events. And this is going to continue. Buckle up. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Like with the pandemic, with climate change, we're dealing with lagging indicators. And we know that, we could stop pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere today, and we would still be stuck with the effects of our actions up to today for many, many, many years to come. And unfortunately, we're not in a position to do that. We can't just flip a magic switch and turn things off. We need to be making massive investments in renewable energy and decarbonizing our energy system and decarbonizing, frankly, every sector of the economy. And massive investments in boosting the resilience of the communities on the front line so that, cities on the coasts don't get swept away and inundated, so that people don't lose their homes, so that we can continue to feed ourselves. There's no doubt that the victory of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democrats is an absolute win for the planet. And, I, for one, have breathed a sigh of relief, not because it means that the problem is solved and we can, relax and sort of go back to not worrying about it, but because the bar was set so terribly cataclysmically low by Donald Trump that anything would be an improvement. And it seems that there are early signs that Biden and his team understand climate change and take it seriously. I've read that they'll be bringing back a whole government approach such that climate expertise and decision making and risk analysis is embedded into every agency, and that's appropriate. That's what we should be doing. Frankly, it's what we should have been doing for the last 2 decades, because climate change affects everything. So there's no doubt that the Biden victory is a massive win for every farm, for every firm, for every factory that depends on a relatively stable climate, that has taken for granted the relatively stable climate that we've had on the earth for the last 10,000 years. So let's celebrate that to the extent that we can. We do need this whole government approach. And frankly, folks in the business community need to be thinking about this in a similar way, embedding climate risk analysis and decision making and expertise at the board level, at the executive level, and throughout their organizations, because there's not an industry in my mind that is immune to climate change. Some are, of course, are more at risk than others, or more immediate risk than others, and different industries, different sectors, different businesses face different risks. But if you're not even asking yourself the question, what types of risks do I face on a rapidly warming planet? Man, I mean, I think you're not doing your job, and we're seeing a growing rise of climate-related litigation, a growing demands from investors for greater disclosure around climate-related risks, and I think that this trend is just going to snowball in the years ahead. We're going to see more and more of these demands, and so get ahead of the curve. Put that expertise in your organization now, and start thinking about these things seriously. We need to be decarbonizing, and we need to be increasing resilience. So there's two ways that I like to sum this up. One, Elizabeth May, great Canadian politician, has famously said, "A good hockey player skates to where the puck is going." We know where the puck is going, right? We know where the puck is going. We know the climate is changing. We know we have to decarbonize. We know that there are massive risks from climate change to every sector of the economy, to every part of our lives, in every part of the world. The longer we delay, the worse it's going to be. And I think there's a lot of room for early movers to have advantage, to carve out new business ideas, to find new efficiencies, to find new markets, to create new products that are going to help us solve these problems. So move quickly. A good hockey player skates to where the puck is going. The other thing I like to say is there's no high emissions path to prosperity. We often get this ridiculous framing that there's a trade-off between the environment and the economy, and that is just nonsense, especially when we're talking about climate change. Because if we just keep pumping out greenhouse gas emissions more and more every year, we are going to wind up very quickly with a degree of economic disruption and dislocation that is frankly unprecedented, and that may make COVID look like a relative walk in the park, that will make decision-making very, very difficult and unpredictable, that will make life inhospitable in certain places of the planet, that will devastate our agriculture and so on. So where's the trade-off? Where's the trade-off between environment and economy? There's no high emissions path to prosperity. We will not have a prosperous future. We will not have the prosperous future that we want if we continue to pump out greenhouse gases, if we don't get serious about climate change quickly. Conversely, where's the prosperity? The only path to prosperity is through aggressive emissions reduction. The only path to prosperity is through urgent action, urgent serious action on climate change. And this is exciting, and that's what we should be excited about, because we're not dealing with that trade-off. When we think about ways to cut emissions, when we think about decarbonizing our energy or transport or residential or heating systems, or our increasing the resilience of our food systems, or investing in infrastructure to make our cities livable and keep them safe, we shouldn't be thinking that this is a trade-off against the economy. We're investing in the economy. That is our path to prosperity. Taking these actions, getting serious about climate change is the only path to prosperity. So that's where I leave it. These are the things that I've been thinking about. If you like this video, I'm building up my channel. Please hit like. It'll help me so much. Hit subscribe. It'll help me so much. Drop something in the comments. Let me know what you think. And check out my newsletter at crisiscentury.substack.com. I'll put a link in the description. It's a newsletter that I run, and it's all about these overlapping crises that we're facing in the 21st century and how we can thrive in the face of them. So that's it. Keep an eye out for my upcoming videos, and thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourself out there.